What makes a material convincing and pleasing to look at often lies in the small details, the little somethings that just breathe life and personality into it. In this video, I'd like to walk you through a couple of techniques to make your work look more realistic and organic. So here's our current height map. It's looking decent, but we can push it further with a few tricks. First, I feel like things look a bit flat in the trim area. It looks like if it was just pasted on top of the fabric instead of being sewn into it. And that's a flaw I often see in beginner materials, where you feel like the various elements are just put on top of each other without really interacting with one another, which often results in that fake CG look. So typically, in the case of our trim, I would expect some tension and bulging around here. How can we do that? By now, you should feel familiar with the grayscale logic of height maps. So what I have in mind is to make the borders here lighter, that is higher than what is directly under the trim, so that we get some sort of raised lip around it. Let's first see if we can reuse something. We have the trim mask here. That could be a good starting point because it traces perfectly the bits that need to be lower. But we can't use it as is, because if we were to subtract it from the main height, like so, you see that it would just remove the trim altogether. So here's what we're going to do. If we blur this mask enough, the shape will sort of bleed out. See how it expands? Okay, so let's keep it at 0.8. Now again, we can't use it like that because it would remove the trim and we don't want that. So in order to protect it, we could take the non-blurred version and subtract it from this. Like so. Let's put that in a blend. Subtract. And so you see the black areas here are protected. They're going to stay at the same level. These outlines, though, are going to pull the fabric down, giving hopefully more depth and volume to our trim. So let's try it. Oh my, look at that. It's exactly what we wanted. See if I mute the node with Shift-D. So you see, it's not a lot of effort, but it really makes a difference and adds realism to a material. Now let's talk about imperfections. No material in real life is perfectly straight or smooth or uniform. There will always be subtle variations. Think about specks of dust, tiny fibers sticking out from clothing, dents and scratches on a hard surface, and so on. All these irregularities do not make a material flawed, but it makes it real. And so if we aim at realism in our work, we need to pay attention to this. Now, if we look back at what we did in the previous episodes, we already tried to take that into account. For example, when we sprinkled a bit of randomness here and there in the tile generators. That was a good start, but let's push things a bit further. I would like to do two things. The first one is to apply micro distortions to the weave. Now, when it comes to distorting, you already know what kind of node we need. Yes, we need a warp, but instead of using the basic warp, we're going to use the directional warp, the one with that arrow here. It works the same way. It takes an input and a gradient map, but it also comes with an angle parameter, meaning you can distort in a specific direction, which is very useful because then we'll be able to align the distortion with our weave and so avoid having something too jarring. Okay, now let's plug it. And that's actually a good question. Where should we put that warp? If we put it, for example, here, then it will also distort the trim, which we don't want. So we need to make sure we add it before all that. So right after the height blend here. Okay. Now for the intensity input, I like to have something very directional, but also with a lot of control. The directional scratches would be perfect, I think. So let's rotate it and plug it to a directional warp to explain quickly how it works. So like I said, the directional warp pushes the input in a set direction. So by default, it will push horizontally like that, but we can change that. So let's go for 90 degrees. All right. Now it feels really strong and overwhelming as is. That's because our intensity input here is quite noisy. So let's adjust it. I'm going to start by decreasing the pattern amount to 0.02, something very low. Then increase the scale to 9 so that we have more shapes but smaller. Then we can refine the scaling with the X and Y slider. So I'm going to thicken them a little on the X and shorten them on the Y. We can also add a bit of randomness. Okay, let's try with a warp at 1 and Shift D to compare before and after. Alright, that's very subtle, but it really helps breaking that uniformity without getting too distracting. Then last but not least, I'd like to add a feature that is specific to fabrics and soft materials in general, and that is folds and wrinkles. It's a fascinating topic and we could spend hours on it, but let's make it quick and easy for this video. Since it concerns the base fabric and obviously not the gemstones or the trim, we might be tempted to add it right after the warp here. But I'm not going to do that, and for several reasons. One reason is that our current height map is well balanced, it works well, everything fits nicely, and if I were to add large variations here, it may disrupt some of the things that we added later. The other reason is that it's often simpler and more efficient to add these kinds of finishing touches as a separate normal map. Let me show you how. We're going to take that space just above our main normal map and start building a small folds generator here. Let's start with a noise. Creased is usually a solid base for that, with these soft lines. It's a bit too straight for me, so I'm going to quickly warp it. So warp, then take a purlin, scale it up, then push the warp. Okay. Then I'm going to soften all this with a blur. All right. And now let's turn this into a normal map. So just take a normal node, plug it in, and here increase the strength quite a lot, like 6 or 7. So we now have two normal maps. How can we combine them? Well, if you type in combine, here's your answer. So let's take this normal combine. I'm going to take this one first, and this second one here. And you see what it does? It's a bit hard to tell because it's super noisy, but it essentially keeps our original normal information and just adds the folds to it. So let's plug it to our base material to see how it looks in 3D. Not bad. We can adjust the effect by playing with the normal intensity of our folds and balance it with the blur. Okay, I'm pretty happy with it. There's one problem though. Since we added our folds at the very end of our node arrangement, it means they also affect the trim and the gemstones. Fixing this problem shouldn't be too hard. What we could do is blur this edge here so that we don't get any intense folds in this area. So far, we've only been using the high quality blur, and this node blurs uniformly the whole input. But when we need something more selective, we can use the non-uniform blur. As you would expect, it's using an intensity map, a bit like the warp, to determine what part of the image to blur. And now we need to search for an intensity input that could do the trick. Again, no need to create anything from scratch. We can probably get away with one of the masks we already made. So let's see. There was that trim mask here. And with a few adjustments, it probably can work. Now remember, we docked this to a dot node, meaning we don't have to drag the connection across. Instead, we're going to call for a dot node here, then select the trim mask from there. Now, to make it work, obviously, we need to expand it. We could do it with a blur, but I think a bevel would be more efficient. Let's push it up to 0.1. And you see that since we're expanding something that sits on the very edge of the tile, well, it repeats on the other side. We don't really want that, so you know the drill by now. Tiling, absolute, and keep vertical tiling only. Okay, let's plug that to the intensity input of our non-uniform blur. And this is what we get. We need to make a few adjustments. I'm going to push the samples to the max to have a very smooth transition. Then push the intensity to 25 or something. Now let's reroute everything. And voila! Now, no matter the intensity of the folds, you see, they will not affect this edge here, so our problem is fixed. Let's frame that. Call it folds. There we go. Alright, so in this video, we saw the importance of details and imperfections when it comes to achieving realism in your work. We went over a couple of techniques, such as adding depth and volume where two elements meet, creating micro distortions, and finally creasing the fabric a little. With all these details taken care of, we can at last move on to the other maps that make up our material, and I'll see you in the next video to tackle the base color.